Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend, and I'm glad to finally get this thing going. And now we finally get to talk about more psychology. I know that it's going to excite everyone. Today, we're going to kind of go over a brief history of psychology. We'll do some more of this as we go through the class, especially once we start talking about individual sections and ideas and thoughts about how psychology works. Now, we are starting, this is our first online lesson, so I hope that you will, be able to take this, use it, learn something from it. But right now, this is how we're going to do things from now on. Now, as far as the history of psychology, pretty much as long as there have been humans, there have been people interested in the behaviors of other people, including themselves. 2,000 years ago, ancient Greek philosophers pondered human behavior. Socrates suggested that we learn about our own behavior by carefully examining our own thoughts and feelings. So this is what we called introspection. This is looking within, okay? Now, too often we're so busy with our lives that we never get a chance to reflect on our own thoughts and behaviors. And this kind of stops and allows us to investigate why we do what we do and why we feel the way we feel and what exactly is causing us to think the way we do. And so it kind of gives us not only an insight into ourselves, but an insight into other people. Now, there were, several major Greek philosophers. You had Socrates and Plato, where they thought that all knowledge was born within us. And then you have Aristotle, who believed that our knowledge grows from our experiences stored in our memories. And they were, those are very different ideas. Socrates and Plato were Socrates was the student, was the teacher, Plato was the student. Now, they do actually help us kind of tackle a key issue in psychology, which is the idea of nature or nurture. Are we born inherently who we are? Are we born that way? Or is it something that we learn through our environment? And that's a question we're going to be wrestling with just about the entire length of the class. Now, next up, there's Francis Bacon, who was actually the scientist who developed the scientific method. And the thing is, psychology is a science. It is something that that we are born, or not necessarily born, but that we learn about, and you use scientific principles to help understand the human mind. Basically, with this idea, adding to Bacon's ideas helped form modern empiricism, which is the idea that knowledge originates in experience and that science should therefore rely on observation and experimentation. You use the scientific method to come up with a question and an answer. Okay? Then there's Wilhelm Wundt, who founded the first experimental psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig in 1879. In this lab, emphasis was placed on the study of introspection through the controlled and disciplined observation of one's own mind. Basically, Wundt combined philosophical introspection with techniques and laboratory apparatus. Basically, he took what he could see and document, and his introspection, the ideas of, going back towards the Greeks, but with scientific principles that he could experiment with. He argued that we learn little about our minds from casual, haphazard self-observation. It is essential that observations be made by trained observers under carefully specified conditions for the purpose of answering a well-defined question. So you have to ask a very specific question and then use the same conditions to observe people and their reactions to said question. So an example, their machine measured the time, the time lag between people's hearing a ball hit a platform and they're pressing a telegraph key. So it's kind of like testing, human reaction time, which is part of psychology because it's part of our nervous system. It's part of how, we react and how long we react to stimuli. The idea was you press a button as soon as you hear the sound, and you could determine, it gives you an idea of how fast someone can react. Then there's Titchener, who developed structuralism, okay? This breaks down conscious experience into two categories, objective and subjective. Objective sensations are like sight and taste, which are seen as accurately representing the outside world, meaning that you could see something and objectively know what it was. Okay. Then there's subjective, which is thoughts and feelings, emotional responses, mental images. So, like, the objective part is the actual sight or the taste, whereas the subjective part is how you feel about said sight or taste. And what it is that the human mind combines these two. So, like, if you look at an apple, for example, a person can experience an apple objectively by observing its shape, color, texture, taste. But they can also experience it subjectively by remembering how good it feels to bite into it, how much they enjoy the taste, or how much they hate the taste. Like, it's just every person's going to have a different subjective reaction, and that's the whole idea. Subjective means it's inherent to you specifically. Okay, and then there's Gestalt, which is consciousness being at best understood by observing it as a total experience rather than breaking it down. So basically, it's based on the idea that perceptions are more than the sum of their parts. They are instead wholes that give shape or meaning to the parts. Where structuralism breaks down consciousness into individual pieces, Gestalt rejects that breakdown. Think of it like, if you ever notice how a series of flashing lights often appears to be moving, such as neon strands, Christmas lights, it's like you kind of feel like it looks like there's some sort of motion, when really it's not. But that, according to Gestalt psychology, this apparent movement happens because our minds fill in the missing information. We're filling in the gaps. This belief that the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts led to the discovery of several different phenomena that occur during perception. Okay? Now, so let's take a look at the picture right here, right? Like, it's kind of hard to tell what it is. But if you were to, go through each piece, like, you would be, like, if you were to look at it closer, or if you were to get a full picture, it would actually show up as a Dalmatian. Same thing, if you were to look at these, like, dotted lines, you see, like, if you were to fill in the gaps, you would see a circle as opposed and a square. Like, these are, like, we're more likely to look for the holes. And same thing, if you were to show like this in sequential order, it's kind of like movie making. It's that a movie is 24 frames a second. It's individual pictures that are taken, but our mind fills in the gaps, and it gives us the illusion of movement. Okay, and then there's William James and functionalism. So James looked at Darwin's studies, the studies of being evolution, like his ideas about evolution, and believed that consciousness or thinking was like a bird's wings or a cheetah's legs. It developed through evolution in humans as a form of survival. Consciousness serves as a function. Okay, it enables us to consider our past, adjust to our present circumstances, and plan our future. He encouraged explorations of down-to-earth emotions, memories, willpower, habits, and moment-to-moment streams of consciousness. So we're trying to learn all this stuff too. Now, William James is kind of considered the father of psychology. He wrote the first modern book of psychology in 1890, The Principles of Psychology. And so most of what people start with studying him starts there today. Now, because James thought that the function of sensations, ideas, and memories was important, his view became known as functionalism. Now, then we come to probably the most famous psychologist in history, is Sigmund Freud, who was a doctor who noticed that some of his patients displayed physical problems that did not have an apparent physical cause. So he noticed, it's like, well, they're doing this thing, and it's kind of like, I don't understand why it's being caused. So when he discovered that people started talking about their daily problems or stresses, their physical ailments began to disappear. So when they started kind of talking about things and expressing their feelings, that, it started to heal them in a way. So he also began using hypnosis and other methods to discover stresses and memories that his patients were unaware of. So things that they did not actually realize that they were doing, he checked them out. So he said that these lie in the subconscious and must be drawn out by these techniques. Now, the thing about Freud is that part of the reason he's popular is because his ideas really kind of got pulled into the mainstream. I mean, it's become part of pop culture. I mean, when you think about it, have you ever tried to interpret a slip of the tongue or tried to figure out the meaning of a dream? You're trying to understand why you're thinking certain thoughts. The idea is that people are driven by hidden impulses, and verbal slips and dreams all began with Freud. And in fact, you've probably heard, when somebody makes a slip of the tongue and it's kind of embarrassing, like you probably heard of someone saying a Freudian slip. Well, that's it. It's just like trying to say, well, that's what you really mean. I mean, you just, there. Now, so here's some more concepts to help you understand. So picture this: a rat and a maze. A hungry rat is cruising through a maze. It moves along until it reaches a place where it must turn left or right. If the rat is consistently rewarded with food for turning right at that place, it will learn to turn right when it arrives there. But what does the rat think when it's learning to turn right at the place in the maze? Who knows? Okay. So let's, think about it again. So, I mean, it's like, what is it thinking? It's cruising through the maze. It, left or right. And the idea is that we don't know, but eventually it's trying to find the cheese, right? That's the idea. And this leads us to John B. Watson, who was the person who kind of, established behaviorism. Now, I mean, we don't really know what the mouse is thinking. There's no way for us to know what that mouse was thinking. But the idea that John B. Watson, that was what he thought. So instead of trying to figure out what it's thinking, you understand it's like you look at its actions and then maybe you can extrapolate. So he saw that consciousness as a private event that is known only to the individual. Like, I can never really know what's going on in your head, but I can look at your actions and that can kind of give me an idea. So he believed that psychology should just be limited to studying observable, measurable events. Okay? So originally the definition of psychology was the science of mental life. Well, this wasn't accurate. It was the scientific study of observable behavior. Now, the thing is, his name's John B. Watson. His middle name was actually Broadus, but, to help you remember, it's going to be behavioralist. He's the behavior guy. He's the one that John, behavioralist Watson, he's the one that feels like psychology should be limited to observable behavior. Because it was believed to be believed it was unscientific to try to use behavior as a way to understand the unconscious. Instead, he thought psychologists should base psychology on what they can observe. He recognized Freud's unconscious mind, but it's unobservable. We can't really know what's going on there. Therefore, it would prevent psychology from being a science. And really, until the 1920s, psychology was defined as I said, the science of mental life. But he defined it as the scientific study of observable behavior. Now, there are other people you need to be aware of. You've got B.F. Skinner. It's this guy right here. He actually was a big proponent of the idea of reinforcement. Now, have you taught a pet a trick? Have you ever tried to train an animal or even another person? Well, Skinner believed that humans learn the same way. Chances are you've probably, experienced this without even realizing it. It's the idea of positive or negative reinforcements to push a behavior. Okay? So animals have been taught complex behavior patterns. And behavioralists have taught animals to climb ladders, push toys across the floor, and even shoot baskets by rewarding them. So the idea is that if you do what I want you to do, I'm going to give you a treat. Okay? And if you've ever been to the zoo and seen animals like, the lions or the elephants or the seals or whatever doing tricks, you're seeing his ideas in action. Now, we'll go over more, some of this will go into more depth later on, but just these are some of the key concepts that help define and shape psychology as we know it today. So hopefully this gives you a little quick breakdown, and I can't wait to see y'all in class tomorrow. I hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll keep going whenever you're in class. All right, thank you.